You found the fallen tree. It's right there on the bank, half in the water, branches spread out wide. You walked up, picked a spot, and made what felt like a pretty clean cast straight at the trunk. Nothing happened. You made 6 more casts at the same spot, from the same angle, and got the same result. Plus, you left 2 rigs in the branches. Here's what's actually going on. The cast that feels right when you're standing on the bank is usually the cast with the least time in the strike zone and the most chance of spooking a fish before the lure even gets close. The problem isn't the tree. It's the angle, the order, and which part of the tree you start on. By the end of this video, you'll know how to read a fallen tree before you cast, where the bass are most likely to be holding, how to approach the structure so you don't blow the spot before the first lure hits the water, and how to work from the right end out. 3 things this video covers: why the tip of the tree matters more than the trunk for your first cast, how bass actually use the branches versus the main body of the tree, and what a follow and stop tells you about the fish that didn't bite, and the one that still might. Picture a fallen tree, probably one you've fished before. Roots on the bank, trunk laying out flat, branches underwater, the tip reaching out maybe 20 or 30 feet into the lake. Your instinct from the bank is to stop where the trunk is most visible. That's where the tree is widest, most obvious, and cast straight out, perpendicular to the bank. That instinct makes sense visually, but it puts your lure on a path that crosses every branch junction between you and the water. Every one of those intersections is a potential snag, and every snag pulls the lure sideways, away from the wood, out of the zone where the fish is holding. There's also a timing problem. Bass are ambush predators. They hold tight to structure and wait for prey to come to them rather than chasing it across open water. When they're sitting inside the branches of a laydown, they're facing outward, watching the open water at the edge of the canopy for movement. A cast that drops into the middle of the trunk from the side puts your lure behind them before it ever enters their field of view. You've made the right cast to the wrong position. The tip of the tree is a different story. That's where the deepest branches are, where the structure meets open water, where baitfish move in and out of cover. The outer limbs of a laydown tend to hold the most active fish, fish that are positioned to feed, while the trunk and the deeper interior hold fish that are sitting, resting, or less aggressive. Start where the fish are already looking for food, not where the tree is easiest to see from the bank. Here's the first thing to check when you walk up on a fallen tree. Which way is it oriented to the bank, and where does the tip end up? If the tree runs parallel to the bank, the trunk is the shallowest part, and the tip extends out at roughly the same depth. If it runs at an angle, the tip reaches deeper water, and that's the end you want to start on. A laydown that bridges from 3 feet of water at the roots out to 8 or 10 feet at the tip gives bass something a parallel tree can't: the ability to move vertically in the water column while staying connected to cover. They can hold in 6 feet of water, push shallow to feed, and drop back without traveling far from the structure. That kind of tree is a more complete piece of habitat, and it tends to hold more fish across more of the day. Before you cast, stand back from the bank a few feet and look at where the branches disappear underwater. Dense foliage at the tip creates the kind of shaded pocket where bass will sit during the middle of a sunny day, using the shadow as both cover and visual advantage. When you find a tree with a thick, bushy canopy still intact in the water, that shaded zone is your priority target. Not the trunk, not the roots, not the most visible part of the structure. Your first cast goes to the outside edge of that canopy, parallel to the branch line, not across it. Here's why that matters practically. Casting across a laydown, perpendicular to the trunk, means your lure is making contact with multiple branches on the retrieve. Every contact point is a potential snag, and from the bank, you can't shake a snagged lure loose the way you can from a boat. More importantly, each contact point creates vibration that travels through the wood into the water. Bass have a sensory system called the lateral line, a row of pores along the length of their body that detects low-frequency pressure changes in the water, roughly in the 1 to 80 cycle range, which is exactly what a lure scraping and bumping through branches produces. If a fish is sitting inside that structure, it feels every contact your lure makes before the lure ever enters its visual range. The cast that produces the most mechanical noise through the wood is the cast that is most likely to put the fish on alert before you have a clean presentation. Fishing parallel to the bank and along each limb, moving your position so you can run the lure down one branch at a time instead of across all of them, keeps your lure in the strike zone longer, keeps snags at a minimum, and keeps the noise signature cleaner. It takes more casts, but each cast has a better chance of actually reaching a fish that doesn't know you're there. Now, within that single fallen tree, there are distinct zones, and each one tends to hold a different type of fish. The outer limbs, the branches furthest from the trunk, closest to open water, tend to hold the most active, most aggressive fish. These are fish that are set up to feed. They're watching the open water at the edge of the structure for baitfish moving in. Your first casts go here, before anything else. If those outer branches produce a bite or a follow, the tree is active. If they produce nothing after 3 or 4 clean presentations, move inward, but don't skip straight to the trunk. Work the midsection of the branches next, the area where branch density is highest, where the shade is deepest if the foliage is still intact. This zone tends to hold fish that are less aggressive but still catchable with a slower presentation, something that falls straight down through a gap in the limbs rather than moving laterally. The trunk itself, running from the branch section back to the roots on the bank, is often the least productive starting point. Fish that are relating strictly to the trunk are usually resting, sitting between feeding periods, tucked against the wood in a way that makes them hard to present to cleanly and unlikely to commit to a lure. That doesn't mean the trunk produces nothing. On cold, high-pressure days, when fish are compressed tight into cover, the trunk can be the only zone that gives you anything, but it's rarely where you find the willing, active fish first. Work the tree from the tip in, not from the trunk out. There's one more read you need to make before you pick up and move to the next tree. Water temperature and time of day change where within the laydown the fish are positioned, and this shift is real enough to turn a 0 into a catch if you understand it. Early morning, before sunlight penetrates the water column, bass tend to sit on the outer edges of structure. They're in feeding mode. The cover gives them a reference point, but they're using the nearby open water to intercept bait fish. As sunlight increases, particularly in clear water where light penetration is significant, bass move into the denser interior of the structure. Shade becomes the priority. The same fish that was sitting on the outside branch at 7 a.m. may be buried in the thickest part of the canopy by 10 a.m. Your presentation has to change accordingly. What worked 2 hours ago in an area you can cast to easily may now require a much shorter, more precise delivery into a gap in the branches, a pitch, not a cast. The fish didn't leave. It relocated inside the same piece of cover you're already fishing. The other read worth making on every tree you fish, the direction of any current or wind-driven drift. Bass are opportunistic feeders, and when water is moving, even slowly from wind pushing the surface, they will position on the side of the structure where drifting food comes to them. On a still lake with a light wind pushing water from left to right, a fish relating to a fallen tree is more likely to be on the left side of the trunk, facing into the drift than on the right side where food has already passed by. This isn't always dramatic. On calm days with no detectable drift, it doesn't change the red much. But on days when wind has been consistent for a few hours, the feeding side of any piece of structure, including fallen trees, shifts toward the direction from which the water is moving. Check the wind before your first cast and adjust which side of the tree you approach first. The side that gets the drift almost always produces more than the side that gives it up. Here's where most beginners misread fallen trees, and where the data from this particular piece of structure already tells you more than you realize. Everything covered so far was framed around where bass hold and how to present to them. The assumption behind all of it is that the fish is stationary, waiting inside the structure. But bass in active feeding mode don't just wait. They move through the structure. A laydown isn't just a place where fish sit. It's a route. Fish use the corridor between the trunk and the branches as a lane to move between the resting zone near the roots in deeper water and the feeding zone out at the tip near open water. That changes how you interpret a follow and stop when a bass tracks your lure to the edge of the structure and then turns back without committing. The reflex interpretation is that the fish wasn't interested, but the lateral line research tells a different story. Bass use their lateral line to identify the size, direction, and vibration pattern of anything moving near them. A follow and stop near the branch edge is often a fish that tracked the vibration, closed the distance to get visual confirmation, and then held position. Not a rejected lure, but an inspecting fish that hasn't yet committed. That's different from a rejection. A rejection looks like a fish turning away before it reaches the lure. An inspection looks like a fish arriving at the lure's location and stopping. If you see a follow and stop at the edge of the branches, don't immediately cast again to the same spot. Pause. Let the lure sit completely still. The fish's lateral line is still processing the absence of movement. A few seconds of dead stillness followed by one subtle twitch often produces the bite that the moving lure didn't. The laydown didn't go cold. The fish is telling you it wants a different trigger, and the structure you already read correctly put you in the right position to give it one.